Yeah, and look, that's great, Bob, because as I say, the viewers here will manage, if it's okay with you, to get little snippets of that, like little bits of footage, because I'd love that to be up here where people can witness that, and even people from overseas, you know, checking out what the system was like. Because really, no matter where you are in the world, I believe back in the time, and even to a degree now, that the rail system was very similar no matter what country you're in, and especially London, England. Like, man, that was back in the day. I used to love watching movies that had anything to do. There was a movie, a particular movie, I can't remember what it was called, but he was in the railway. He was a driver, and I loved it. Just the essence of packing his box and going to the rail yard. There was another big story behind it, but it always fascinated me, England, because they've got such a massive rail system there.
This will interest you, I'm sure. I loved Silverstone when it was in its peak. I used to make trips to Silverstone either on or off the overland or Bluebirds to Wolseley and walk across. But I really spent a lot of time in Silverstone and stayed there during the day to capture a lot of the atmosphere and all the activities that went on at such a busy place. Now, if you just hold that for a moment, on an overseas holiday a few years ago, we're in southern France, and we took the very scenic journey down to near the Italian border, a place called Modane. And when I got off at Modane station, all of a sudden I felt like I was at Silverstone, because here were these people in different railway uniforms, different coloured locomotives, different types of locomotives. It was just like, you know, you're on the border in the days when Silverstone was, you know, that's Victoria that way, and everything's different, you know, colours, the people, the uniforms. And here I am at Modane on the Italian border, think to myself, it's just like Silverstone, really, except European style Silverstone.
I know, right? And you're right, I love Silverstone, because I was at Tail and Bend for a while, and Silverstone always had my interest because it was that hub, like Albury Wodonga, which is just a ghost town now in the rail yards. We go up there and take photos of the yard, but it's quite sad because you can still hear the spirits of the trains there and the crews, but it's all just, it's sort of a little bit sad, you know, when you see that, but progress has got to be progress. Me and my son, Caden, we drove from Melbourne to Adelaide to see family, and we did that. We pulled into Silverstone and took photos of the place, and you think, wow, it's just, what a ghost town now, you know, but you can still feel the energy there, you know, from back in the day. And it's, you're dead right. It's, there's so many interesting little spots around Adelaide. And for people who don't know, Silverstone was right on the county line, as they say in America, or the border of like Victoria and South Australia. So you're right, the locomotives behind me would stop, they'd come off, the South Australian locomotives would be put on, but now that's all changed. The trains just run straight through, keeping the same locos on, and the crews even go over the borders now.
Yeah. Even though I was never a locomotive driver myself, of course, being involved with the National Railway Museum, we've got an extensive operation there that has got all three gauges on it. So we get directly involved with shunting on the different gauges, and that's why it's so important that we maintain a broad gauge, that's 1600 mil, and a standard gauge 1435 mil diesel electric locomotive. So we've got an 800 class, an older English electric 800, and a 500 class, and they do all of our shunting. So I sometimes, when I'm in the shunting activity at the museum, I'm sitting on the front step of an 800 class, banging around in the yard, and I'm thinking to myself, I was doing this nearly 50 years ago, and nothing's really changed. You know, same locomotive, doing the same job, and it's just like a time tunnel. It's unbelievably the same. Amazing stuff. Amazing.
Yeah, and look, I'd love to be involved in that. At the moment, it's a little bit difficult because I'm not, you know, in Australia for very long when I come back. But same up at Seymour. Seymour's got a great little museum there, but a lot of working locomotives which they take out, you know, and run. But me and my boy go up there and have a look at that and think, oh, this would be so good to be involved in that and working and shunting around the yard, same as the big down Newport workshops in Melbourne. We went down there once, and I'd really encourage my son, who wants to be a driver, to try and get involved in those areas just to learn, because the more you learn now, it's going to help you when you go to apply for a job, knowing that you're really interested in the rail. Hey, sorry, Doug. As I said, every time I go start talking about railways, mate, I'm off on the express blabbermouth. Away you go, mate. Ask some questions before I get you over there.
I was actually going to ask. I was going to ask Bob. What is being a rail historian like? Did that earn you a lot of respect in the rail community?
Well, I've been involved, directly involved with the publication of about 8 books altogether. And I certainly enjoy any opportunities that come my way to proofread or check other books from other authors, just to make sure that the facts are indeed accurate. But the enjoyment I get out of researching stuff is that I'm always learning something I didn't know before, because the railways have been, in some ways, behind the scenes, there's always this mystery about why is it so. And I love that why is it so from Some to Miller, a program. I love that why is it so, and that's what's really intrigued me. Why has it ended up the way it is? What were the steps, rightly or wrongly, that's ended up how it is? And people like the great, who I befriended very well, more so after he retired, Ron Fitch was one of the last commissioners of the South Australian Railways, and he's written about 3 or 4 different books. And of course, he was in a very turbulent time politically, and with gauge standardisation in particular, he fell out with the government officials in regards to the standardisation between Broken Hill and Port Pirie, that eventually saw the demise of a major narrow gauge network. And of course, Ron was vehemently wanting to put standard gauge far more around the mid-north than what currently existed, to avoid this triple gauge shunting and transferring freight, and of course that all led to its demise because it just become so costly to maintain all that stuff, and it's delving into those behind the scenes reasons for why things happened, and he's not the only one. I mean, in my days at corporate and public relations with Australian National Railways, I mean, I was working closely with a lot of the people in that corporate exec area, and I've got to tell you, it was really a sad occasion, because the feds were pushing and pulling Australian National, because it was a federal government agency at the time, and there was a lot of decisions that had to be made that weren't really the best decisions from a professional railway point of view, but sometimes they just had to go along with it. Quite sad, really, in some ways, but great people to work with. Great people. Yeah,
that's the thing too. Like, it's so good that you were involved in that side, because when I left, it was still Australian National, pretty sure. Yeah, it went from South Australian Railways to A&R, and then massive changes come. And look, this might sound strange, but I would still dream about the Dry Creek rail yard, because it was fascinating, because everything moved from Mile End to Dry Creek, and it was such a big deal out there. But everything like Port Adelaide started disappearing. Mile End went. When I go back to Adelaide now and I drive over the bridge, and I think, you wouldn't even know. You would have no idea, this massive yard there, locomotive sheds, and you think, wow, things have really changed. But there must have been some really big, powerful decisions behind, someone foreseeing, okay, this is no good anymore. We need to move this out of here, get it out of the suburbs, and put it somewhere else. So I'm sure you heard a lot of those stories of how they moved that, started getting rid of Mile End.
Yeah, and look, without getting into some scary stuff, when people say to me about, there's so much grain now not moved by rail, and these branch lines, they carried this and they carried that. But what people have to remember, there's more grain being hauled by rail into the likes of Port Adelaide now than ever before. It's just that it's done differently. You got massive block grain trains with 50, 60 grain hoppers on them, hauling, around the clock sort of cycles to only half a dozen what they call super sites. So the overall tonnage on rail is far more than ever before, far more.
Oh, wow.
Some people just don't see it that way, you see. because they
Yeah,
don't see their little 830 going past the window with 3 or 4 OBs of grain on it. They think it's all, all doomed. It's
yeah.
not.
No, that's
Yeah.
great. And like when I drive around here in LA, I go past a lot of the big freight yards. There's one just a bit south of Los Angeles, and it's a massive yard. Like, oh my gosh, like nothing I've ever seen in Australia, mate. Like, and these double-decker container. I was down at Long Beach the other day, and these massive trains over a mile long, mile and a half long, with these double-deck containers, and 3 engines at the front, 2 in the middle, and 1 at the back, and it's they're just hauling. And I'm pretty sure it's like that in Australia now. They're hauling much bigger trains.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the the COVID impact, of course, on freight in Australia is really not helped a lot, because there's a lot of overall tonnages are down. But one thing that did have a big impact not long ago at all was the fact that the deregulation of shipping meant that ships could offer container rates, say from Melbourne to Perth, at rock bottom prices. So a lot of the non-time sensitive freight was ending up in containers going on ships going to the west, and that saw a decline in a lot of the freight. But now, with less shipping around, because of the whole world is not pushing stuff around as much because it's still affected by COVID, a lot of that freight has found its way back onto rail where it was before. So again, the big haulier Pacific National's running lots of freight services, mainly east-west, not so much Melbourne, Brisbane, but that east-west corridor is very busy again.
Yeah, that's good news. Someone actually mentioned that the other day. I think it might have been Paul Carroll. Mentioned that the shipping's caused quite a bit of issues, and you would never have thought about that years ago, like competing with ships, but you can understand why, because they can just load it up and then just go around the coastline. Which, for me, being an ex-railway man, and a lot of people, you get a little concerned about that. You'd hate to see it take it all away, but I don't think it's going to take it all away. It just probably puts a bit of a dent in it for a little while,
Oh, look, I think I can sense, and it comes as part of doing the magazine regularly, because I'm in touch with a lot of railway industry people, and have always been since I retired nearly 9 years ago. It doesn't in some ways seem like I've retired, but I can sense there's a swing coming back, and Islington Workshops and what they're doing in regards to converting old passenger carriages to crew vans is very interesting, because if those major companies are desperately now seeking more and more crew vans for relay working instead of depot to depot relay working, there's obviously changes in the wind in regards to more freight heading back onto rail that will then trigger the need for additional crew vans, and that's a very good thing, because if the company itself can put itself into a stronger position by reducing its costs, and I know some people won't like the idea of depot to depot means a loss of jobs and things have to change, but it's all about what's the long-term future. If we don't keep ourselves competitive and be able to do the job effectively, we're going to lose out anyway. So I'm a great supporter of, sometimes you just got to go with the best economic decision you've got, and that's it.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, look, back in the time, it was, when you lose Mile End, a lot of people did lose jobs. They offered to go somewhere else or leave, or Tail and Bend closed. So it's always happening. I mean, it's never going to not happen, but I don't say this lightly, I don't want to see people losing jobs, but if there is transition and it's going to give you might relocate, but you're still working out doing relay trains. I mean, I could be talking, without a lot of knowledge here about what you just mentioned, but it's better to keep everything going, like competing with these people, so that the trains are running continuously and get into these, freight depots, container depots, where the train's there and bang, you just unload it, whereas it takes a lot longer to unload a ship. So we have to you have to compete, however you've got to compete. But of course, you don't want to impact, people losing jobs left, right, and centre. And I think, I could be right or wrong, I'm not sure, but I think when they start doing things like that, most people hang on to their jobs. It's just a matter of maybe a little bit of shifting or, shuffling around the board a bit, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
And I think there's going to be more changes in rail, particularly in Australia, and where that ends up, I think it's still a very bright future. I mean, you may not be aware, but there's a thing called the Inland Rail, which is a major trunk route that will go up between Melbourne and Brisbane, but inland, where it is going to capture a lot of different freight that currently trying to get on the East Coast main line is just not working. And one of those advantages, and I mean just one of those advantages, is that you'll be able to come out of Melbourne with a double stack container train heading to Perth and find your way up to Parkes through the guts and then head west. Now, at the moment, anything going from Melbourne to Adelaide and over to the west can only be single stacked until you get to Adelaide because of the tunnels in the Adelaide Hills. So, I mean, freight operators being very clever people as they are, I mean, SCT in particular, they started this sort of modern way of looking at things a long time ago. But to double stack a train out of Melbourne, double stack, going to Perth, that's where you've got to be. You've really got to be in that game.
Yeah, you do. It's like over here in the States, like double stack trains, man. They're just everywhere, like in massive long trains, like hauling across the country. And it's just, yeah, it is. It's the way it should be. So are they building a new lineup through the guts there?
Yeah. It's a combination of bits of new line and substantially upgraded existing lines. So in New South Wales, a lot of it is major upgrading of new lines. A few deviations. I'm not sure if you know that Stock and Bingle sort of area where you go from Junee up to Parkes. All that's being sort of realigned so that they can just simply race through it, track speed and not have to worry about deviations into and out of these places. Right. So yeah, they're certainly building a complete new modern line. It gets a bit hairy as you get up the northern part of New South Wales into, let's say, more rigorous geographical terrain. And Queensland itself is a bit of a basket case still with not really 100% knowing the route because of the extent of tunnels and bridges and all that stuff. But at least if it gets into Parkes and up into most of Western New South Wales, I think inland route will prove to be very successful.
No, that's awesome. Hey, Doug, anything there that comes up for you you'd like to ask Bob, mate?
Yeah, I have one question, which is, you know how in Hollywood it has the film industry and in North Carolina it's the racing industry? What part of Australia would be the railroad industry? Would it be Adelaide, Melbourne, Sydney, or what?